Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get us started. Folks are starting to trick in. As we were saying, this is a busy week in the world of higher education with so many of our campuses getting started with the next academic semester. We appreciate you spending this time with us, for some the lunch hour, for some pre-lunch, some a little post-lunch. I'm Bobby Lauer. I have the pleasure of being the president of Campus Compact, and you are joining us today for a webinar focused on opportunity colleges and universities, and diving into the question of how civic and community engagement advance student access and earnings. Such a critical topic. This webinar is a part of a broader series that Campus Compact is doing, focused on informing practice and storytelling, where we are diving into data sets, and emerging research coming out of the field and looking at the intersection between that work and civic and community engagement and the work of public engagement across higher education. I am excited to be with so many friends and folks that I admire for today's conversation. And rather than introducing them, I'm going to ask each of them to introduce themselves, starting off with Mushtaq.
Thank you, Bobby, and delighted to be here. And Bobby, it's always great to be with the Campus Compact community and to be with you. Mushtaq Gunja, I'm the executive director of the Carnegie Classifications. I've been in this role since early 2022 when the classifications came over to the American Council on Education. I've worked here at ACE for 7 years. I was chief of staff for the first 4 of these, and when I took this project on in 2022, my first call was to Sarah Gast. Sarah?
Hi, I'm Sarah, and I joined Mushtaq then, and have really enjoyed getting to work on these the last 3.5 years or so. Prior to that, I was at a K-12 nonprofit, and then previously worked for the state of Tennessee in the U.S. Department of Education.
Good afternoon, Douglas Craddock, representing the University of Louisville. Shout out to all the cards out there. Blessing to be here, serve as the Vice President for Community Engagement here at the university, faculty member in the College of Ed. I've had the chance to serve as chief of staff in different capacities, but super excited to be here to kind of showcase some of the amazing work that's taking place here at the university among some of my colleagues that's on the call and others here at the school as well. So thank you, and I'll pass it to Cheryl.
Hello, everyone. My name is Cheryl Scafty. I am the Public Engagement Coordinator at the University of Minnesota Duluth. I've been in this role for a couple years. It's a new office here on our campus, and excited to be on this call to talk more about opportunity colleges and what we're doing here at UMD to promote access, research, and outcomes.
Thank you, Cheryl. Hello, everyone. This is Howard Rosing from DePaul University in Chicago. I am the director of the Irwin W. Stein Center for Community-Based Service Learning and Community Service Studies. We are a campus-wide community engagement center that works with faculty and students to integrate community engagement across the curriculum and in many other ways. I'm happy to be with you.
Awesome. Thank you so much to Mushtaq, Sarah, and Douglas, and Cheryl, and Howard, who are going to be with us for the next hour and 10 minutes as we dive into how this data has taken shape, and hearing from Mushtaq and Sarah about how the classification overall system, but then in particular the opportunity colleges and universities was born and developed. And then we're going to have a conversation among Howard, Cheryl, and Douglas, who, as you would guess it, are all at campuses who have been recognized as opportunity colleges and universities, around where does their work intersect with this, and what does it look like to be advancing and leading civic and community engagement with a lens and an eye towards what it means also to be an opportunity college and university. And then we're going to have a conversation amongst all of us, where we'll also ask questions of each other that might come about as folks are talking. I wanted just to begin by shaping that this is a really critical conversation to Campus Compact. Those of us that have been in this work for a long time know that community engagement has long been at the forefront of institutional strategies and outcomes, focused on everything from cradle to career pathways and putting student success front and center. This work, though, takes so many different shapes and approaches. And I am particularly excited with the 3 institutions we have today, which represent just a few of the ways that our institutions are being innovative and understanding the critical role that partnerships and engagement play in advancing students' access and earnings and ultimately driving economic inclusion and social mobility. So we're going to go ahead and dive in, and I'm going to turn it over to my friends and colleagues at ACE, Mushtaq, and Sarah.
Thanks, Bobby, and thank you for the that great framing. I think we are going to do this presentation in a couple of different parts. I wanted to highlight for everybody a little bit of the why, how we came to this work, how we sort of decided to put this thing together the way that we did. I think Sarah's going to spend a little time talking about the changes that we made to the institutional classification, which are crucial because that is the base for the student access and earnings classification, and then this portion of that student access and earnings, which is the opportunity colleges and universities. Sarah, next slide. So, the Carnegie classifications have been around for 53 years now, as I think most of you probably have some sense of. And for those the first 50 years of the classifications, there was really just one classification. This thing that was on the left, we used to call it the basic classification. It sorted institutions by the highest degree that the institution awarded. It was good, perfectly reasonable way of sort of sorting the world. But one of the things that ACE and the Carnegie Foundation sort of recognized when we were deciding to partner on this project was that students and student success was not really anywhere to be found in the classifications. So early on in the project, we decided, let's try to create something, likely a new classification around what we called then sort of social and economic mobility, which was exciting to sort of to think about putting together. And in the 25 classifications, we indeed have now 3 different classifications that are universal. An institutional classification, this now new student access and earnings classification, what we previously had been sort of talking about, social and economic mobility, and then this research activity designation. We're not going to talk about research today. If you have questions, put them in the chat, and I'm happy to sort of talk about them. The other thing we're not going to talk about today are the elective classifications. I know most, all of the folks that are on this campus are probably community engaged campuses, certainly lowercase c and e community engaged classified campuses. But Carnegie has, of course, these elective classifications. Community engagement is the best known of them. We're not going to talk about them very much today, except we'll show you a little bit of some data on the ways in which the community engaged campuses are OCUs, what % of them, and that sort of thing. But again, questions, throw them in the chat, and would love to hear a little bit. I've got all sorts of questions for the great campuses here about the ways in which their work on community engagement might inform the student access and earnings. But first, let me just do a quick, why do the classifications matter? Why are we talking about this? Sarah put this slide together maybe 18 months ago or so. And, when we first started on this project, I think we thought that there were maybe a couple of ways that the classifications were used in higher ed. And as we took this project on, we became sort of blown away at the sort of the embeddedness of the classifications, universal in particular. So, it was created 50 years ago, really for the purpose of institutional research, that bottom left box. But now it's everywhere, and it's used for purposes of funding. It's used in the rankings by US News. It's used for purposes of bragging and prestige by our admissions officers. Like, it is everywhere. My son is applying to college right now. He's a senior, and the number of Carnegie classifications, like references in the literature and the admissions materials, I mean, blows me away. I would keep taking pictures and sending them to Sarah and my boss Ted, except now they're tired. My phone has run out of storage, so I can't even send any more photos. Like, it just, it's just one thing more than it's sort of wild. So it's important, and we really are hoping that we're going to be able to build on the importance of the classifications with this new student access and earnings classification, especially the portion that are these opportunity colleges and universities. I just want to dive in just very quickly to the place where we're sort of most excited, most interested in the use cases, which are states. I mean, there are at least 25 states that are using the Carnegie classifications now to make decisions at the strategic finance level, just generally the strategic planning level. It is in a lot of different places, and one of the things that Sarah and I are going to be pushing over the next few years is, first an awareness campaign of what the classifications are, how we put them together, and then we're hoping that this OCU, Opportunity College and University category, will really take off, and that states will be interested in who their OCUs are, and then potentially to think about funding them differently, than other institutions. So that's sort of the goal. That's what we are sort of hoping to do. And in this awareness campaign that I just referenced, I mean, first step of that is really to understand what we did and how we did it. And Sarah, if you wouldn't mind talking through a little bit of the base institutional classification, and then I'll take it back on the student access and earnings.
So I want to just quickly give an overview of the where we've sort of been on this process for the institutional classification. This is the basic classification that Mushtaq just referenced. This has essentially been the way for about 50 years that Carnegie classifications organized the higher education universe. And sometimes we get asked, like, are classifications even relevant? Like, what's the purpose of them? And before the Carnegie classifications were around, I think there was really just a couple of ways of thinking about the sector. It was public, private. It was, are you a 2-year school or a 4-year school? And those were like the four, kind of dimensions that existed. And the classifications sort of said, if we want to actually understand different types of institutions, understand where there's change, where there's growth, what's happening in different parts of it, we maybe need a little bit more nuance. And that was where this system was born. It was based on degrees awarded by an institution, and it was generally based on the highest degree that was awarded at an institution. And that kind of furthered a chase that was not just led by Carnegie, but was not part of Carnegie, that the higher degree you awarded was perceived as better. And then certainly that category on the far left-hand side of your screen for doctoral universities is where 95% of the energy has been focused around what we kind of colloquially call R1, R2, and the kind of this third category, which occasionally gets called R3. That was sort of what we inherited. And it's, as Mushtaq said, perfectly reasonable in some ways to organize the world in this way, but it really reduces institution to a single dimension. This highest degree awarded is how you find peer institutions. And if we're really trying to classify similar types of institutions in the same group, you can imagine that that's not always the right way to think about peers. And so we looked at something that was much more multidimensional. We've somewhat kind of called this like more of a Myers-Briggs type approach, where we organize institutions based on a couple of different characteristics. And you can see those names on the screen now. We have 31 classifications in the institutional classification this update. And these are very clunky names. They aren't as clean as what you saw on that previous slide. And that's a little bit by design for this, at least for this first iteration, because we want to be very descriptive about what these groups are and how an institution makes it into this group. Are they, we're looking at sort of the 3 dimensions I'll break down just a little bit more, but the types of the fields of study, the size, and then the types of degrees that they're offering. And institutions based on those 3 dimensions are then classified into the same group as their peers. Everybody gets kind of one of these 3 categories. They're the focus of their degrees, and then the award levels they're working at, and then the scale that they're working at. We think these 3 dimensions do a little bit better job of organizing peers. Not perfect, and certainly no institution is a monolith that can always be reduced very cleanly to just a couple of dimensions. But when we think about different types of campuses, we think this is a little bit better way than that previous version. And so one of the things we're sort of working through, and we're happy to take questions on, is just how to understand the old classifications and the new ones. It's a little bit of a fun process we'll go through, I'm sure, over the next several years as we help folks understand what these classifications are, how they work, and how to make sense of them with what came before. As a quick example, like that R1 category that everybody talked about, that's now, I think, 7 or 8 different institutional classifications that have R1 campuses. So again, you're awarding, you're doing a lot of research, but it can be a very different type of campus in the types of degrees that you're awarding, the scale that you're working at, and then the award levels that you're operating at. So that's just an example of how the old doesn't really kind of cleanly, in a good way for us, map on to the new. Just one quick example for University of Louisville. This is what those dimensions mean. So award level focus for the institution is undergraduate, graduate, doctorate, meaning, as you can see in that pie chart, they're awarding a number of undergraduate degrees with still a heavy presence at the graduate level, and they do award the doctorate with a significant impact, or significant emphasis rather. But that is then kind of, we're trying to capture the full scope of that pie chart, not just that one slice of the doctorate production. The academic program mixed is mixed, meaning there's no specific concentration of degrees. They're not awarding degrees just in the arts and sciences. They're not awarding degrees just in pre-professional programs or just in law or just in health professions. They're awarding kind of across a variety of areas in sort of a more comprehensive fashion, and they are large. We're looking at both the undergraduate and the graduate populations, the full-time and the part-time students, and it's not an FTE count, it's a total head count. So when we look at that, that does put them in a scale that is larger. And so those are those three dimensions. That is how we identify peer groups in the institutional classification. And as Mushak said, that was important for us to get this right, in part because of all those use cases that we were talking about earlier, that if you have states deciding funding or faculty workloads or any number of other interesting things that have been determined on that, it's important to have similar peers. But if we're going to look at questions around access and earnings outcomes, we also want to compare those in the context of peers, because of course the types of academic programs that an institution might be awarding degrees in, or the scale that it's operating at, or the level of degrees also impact labor market outcomes for students. And so we wanted to be really thoughtful about how we made sure that we were comparing as much as possible similar types of schools in that work. And I'll let Mushak talk through that a little bit more.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. When we took on this project of sort of thinking about social and economic mobility, what has now morphed into the student access and earnings, I mean, part of the reason that we really needed to get that institutional classification right was not just because of all of those use cases, but because, when we took this work on, we looked at all the existing social and economic mobility work that was out there. A lot of them ended up getting boiled down to rankings. So probably many of you are familiar with the Washington Monthly rankings, or potentially some of the stuff that came out of Georgetown's Center for Education and Workforce. Certainly you all probably are aware of the US News social and economic mobility rankings. All of those had this, to me and Sarah, have the same problem. Comparing unlike institutions together. And for us, it was really important to first make sure that we were grouping meaningfully similar institutions so that we could then compare how well institutions were doing within categories. And when we looked at what was sort of out there and what we thought was important to measure, we looked at all the other rankings that were there, and many of them would measure 10, 12, 20, had 10, 12, 20 different inputs. But when we took a big step back, it felt to us, in sort of deep conversation with a lot of stakeholders, that there were two broad concepts that were important for us to be able to capture. The first was access. How well are institutions doing at providing access to higher ed to the communities they serve? And the second was, how well are those students doing post-attendance, right? What are the outcomes for those students? How are we doing on these two measures, which we think are sort of the core measures of social and economic mobility? Crucially, as we're going to talk about, we needed to account for the location of the students to make sure that we were really fair to institutions when we were thinking about these questions of access and earnings. And then the last step for us in this approach was, presenting these results in a way that really tried to get us away from rankings and tried to get us toward really understanding where any given institution was, both on these two measures in a vacuum and then also compared to institutions that were similarly like them. That was the approach. And it's a lot of words, but really, I swear, it's like relatively simple, I think. These are the data that we use to measure access and then to measure earnings. Just on the access side, sources come from iPads and then the census. We were trying to answer this question that's in the blue box. How well are institutions doing at providing access to a student population that reflects the demographics of the locations that they choose to serve? That's the question that we ask. And the two data measures on access are Pell Grant enrollment and then URM composition of the student body. Both of those crucially relative to the location that students are from. Sometimes when Sarah and I do this presentation, we've got 20 slides trying to prove to y'all how important geography is in sort of understanding and contextualizing, PAL and URM percentage. But you guys are too smart for me to have to go through all that. Like, just trust us. Geography is very important, and we spent a lot of time trying to account for that. Those are the access measures. Earnings is even simpler. We have one measure, and it is median post-attendance earnings. We say post-attendance because we're not just measuring your completers, but all students. For all federally aided students, 8 years after entry, what are the earnings? And then we again contextualize for location, we contextualize for the local labor markets on race and ethnicity, and we compare your institution's actual earnings to the area's earnings and the labor market outcomes of a similar sort of student body. Here's how we considered location, made a lot of references to it. There are sort of two broad types of institutions here. I'll start actually with the ones in the green. For those institutions, and this is the majority of institutions that are either community colleges, associate granting institutions, or regional public institutions, instead of using, we use for your location a sort of more regionally focused number. So for the University of Minnesota Duluth, instead of comparing that institution's outcomes to national outcomes, to sort of US outcomes, the way that almost every other ranking does, or even to just compare to all of Minnesota's outcomes, instead we swap out sort of more regional MSA data, metropolitan statistical area data. So we got a custom data set from the census to really try to understand, knowing that most of our regional serving institution students are coming from the region and not coming from the entire state, right? If you're at a community college in suburban Los Angeles, most of your students are probably coming from that suburban LA region and not from Bakersfield and not from Palo Alto and certainly not from Denver, right? So we wanted to really contextualize it for those sets of institutions that have been defined as sort of regional institutions. For the non-regional institutions, what we do is we use more state level data. In both cases, what we do is we look to see where your students are coming from. So for the University of Minnesota Duluth, 86% of your students are coming from Minnesota. And so we use the Duluth sort of adjustment for that 86%. We have almost 11% of students coming from Wisconsin. So we use an adjustment of 11% of your students from Wisconsin. We use 11% Wisconsin data. And then you can see sort of the remainders. For a school like Amherst, which is much more national in scale, right? This is in the blue box. We weight your data again based on where your students are coming from. So 18% from New York, 14% from California, et cetera. And so we are comparing the actual your institution's actual earnings to what the earnings are for students with similar sort of demographics from New York and California, et cetera. Again, it sounds complicated, and it is. It's a long sort of algebra equation, but as Sarah sometimes says, it's algebra and not sort of calculus. We didn't do significant amounts of regression, like we didn't do a principal component analysis. It's like relatively straightforward. And this is how this classification ends up working. What we did is we look at your actual results and compare it with predicted results. If the value is exactly as predicted, the value would be 1. A value greater than 1 says that the institution is doing sort of better than expected, and less than 1 says that it's a little bit less than the comparison value. So, for instance, if your institution's actual earnings are $60,000 and the institution's predicted earnings would be 45 based on where the institution is located and where the race and ethnicity of your students. We did take 60, we divided by 45. That's a ratio, I think, of 1.3. I think that 1.25. In any case, it's better than 1. That's very good. And so you'll be sort of over 1 on earnings. And we did the same thing for access. If you have a higher than expected Pell percentage or higher than expected URM percentage, you'll get a score that's above 1. And that had us break down the world into one of 6 categories: either higher or lower access institutions, and then lower, medium, and higher earnings institutions. And the easiest way to sort of see this, or one easier way to see this, is in this sort of this breakdown. We classified 3,055 institutions on access and earnings, and you can see the breakdown of institutions across the country here with 16% of institutions in this top category of higher access, higher earnings institutions, including the 3 stellar institutions on this webinar today. So 478 total. This is one way of sort of looking at the world, but not my favorite way of looking. Sarah, next slide. Better way of looking at this is probably sort of a full distribution of all institutions. Like you can see each dot here represents an institution, and just at a high level, putting my other ACE hat on for a second, I'm also senior vice president here at ACE, is a really good news story for how much value higher ed is providing to the community. I mean, 81% of our institutions are over 1 on earnings, more than 3/4 are providing more than expected sort of access. This is generally a good news story. Wonderful. Still not my favorite way of looking at this. We can break it down, sort of get down even a little bit more granular. Just looking at all baccalaureate institutions, this is the distribution. Our baccalaureate institutions, not surprisingly, doing very well on earnings. More than 90% of institutions are above 1 on earnings, 2/3 above 1 on access. And you can see a similar slide for our community colleges. 68% over 1 on earnings, 92% over 1 on access. And this is all fine. Those still are not my favorite ways of looking at this. This slide actually helps us get down to the right sort of grain size, I think, because now we are actually comparing institutions that have that are similar in terms of size, in terms of degree mix, in terms of award level focus. And each dot here, now we can see there's a little bit of a different distribution, and getting down, this is where I think we would like folks to be able to sort of be, partially because once you're here and you identify where you are, it's really instructive to see how well other institutions that are like you are doing for purposes of learning and for purposes of growth, institutional growth, which is exactly why we do these sorts of webinars. And Sarah, static slides are one thing. More interactive websites are even better. Sarah, do you want to spend a couple minutes sort of showing the website?
Before we go over there, I just want to do a couple slides just breaking down sort of where the opportunity colleges fall, since that's kind of a focus here. And so we have just a couple quick slides that understand like who these schools are. And I think, as Mushtak was saying, that the thing that we're encouraged by is we see them throughout the Carnegie classifications, throughout the sector. It's not that one specific type of school, when we're looking at that institutional classification, really has the market on it. We see all sorts of these. So when you look across control, public, private, and for-profit institutions, all are represented there. We look across like scale, for example, the size of an institution. You see a little bit of overrepresentation in that small and medium category, which I was just talking about. It's really interesting for me to help dig in more about, is there an optimal scale to operate at for this type of school? But again, you see all types of sizes represented. And then when we look at the award level focus, so the types of degrees that institutions are awarding, again, you see all types of schools represented there. So it is not as if one type of degree profile has the edge. The other thing we wanted to sort of note is that we look at sort of a way that we think about types is through these other dimensions, including the other Carnegie classifications. So we look at community engaged classified campuses. There are 54 community engaged classified campuses that are OCUs, and there are 424 that are not. When we look at the research activity designations, the R1, R2 in research colleges and universities, again, you can see some of those schools are OCUs, and some of them, and 97 of them are not. And then the area where I think we are increasingly going to keep looking at are these just hyper local focused schools, and local is, bigger or smaller for some of these groups than others. But when we're looking at associate colleges and we're looking at these regional public universities, you can see this is a category where the vast majority of these schools, and we're looking at the full OCU distribution, the majority of these schools have one of these kind of two local focuses. And I think that's a real interesting question for us to study and to dig more into over the next little bit. But would love to show you the website really quick, as Mushtak said, and because I think it has a lot of interesting things that we would love to dig into. So hold on, let me reshare my screen. There we go. Okay. And then, yes, hopefully that works. So this is our Carnegie classification website. And there's a whole bunch of ways you can interact with it. You can kind of search for schools on this list, and we can go straight to that visualization through this this little box on the screen. So when you're on here, you can filter by all the different kind of a couple different main categories. So baccalaureate and above, as Mushtaq said, we have primarily associate, and then we have institutions that are special focus, but award schools at all different levels, which is a little smaller number. When you're in this category, you can search by name. So if you wanted to look for like DePaul in here, you can see where they fall right kind of in that category. And then if you click in to that institution, you can see then a whole bunch of other information that we have available about their fuller Carnegie classification. So the kind of 4 classifications that DePaul would have: their institutional classification, their student access and earnings classification, their research activity designation, and then any elective classification should they have it. And when you click in, you can see all this sort of other information. So you can see where they fall relative to this institutional classification of professions focused, undergraduate, graduate, doctorate, large. And then who some of those peer institutions are that are kind of right around them. Again, for the purposes of kind of study, it's very interesting to us to see institutions that are, have relatively similar earnings outcomes, but very different access values. So here we have some peers of DePaul that are showing relatively similar earnings outcomes in terms of their students being able to compete in their local workforce at roughly the same level, but DePaul opening their doors to a much more racially and socially economically diverse set of students. And then similarly on this access level, omitting the same type of students in terms of representation of their local community, but seeing very different earnings outcomes. And so again, questions we would love to encourage within peers and that we ourselves will be asking over the next several years. A whole bunch of other data on this page, including some of the underlying data that we use to go into that, and other data we don't use, but that we think is interesting and potentially informative around understanding this conversation. So as Mushtaq mentioned, we don't explicitly measure completion rate, for example, in part because completion is kind of a funny thing. Like if you went to school for a degree and you maybe left with a certificate instead of a degree, IPEDS doesn't count you as a completer, but maybe you had some sort of experience that you're able to translate into the workforce. That student still counts in our methodology. But at the same time, we know graduation rates are pretty highly correlated with our earning outcome data. So this sort of can sometimes give us a little bit of a picture of what's happening at a school. Again, they're kind of earnings data, they're comparison earnings data, and we don't include cost or debt in our model, but is a measure that many others include and that many others consider as important to understanding sort of students' data at the end of the day. Same thing on their institutional classification, a whole bunch of different data, including the data that goes into understanding how it ends up in the categories that it ends up in, and their historical classification data. And then if an institution has a research activity designation, sort of the data that go into that as well. So a whole bunch of different things on our website. It's fun to kind of play around, click around through it, and sort of see where people fall on this with lots of different filter options.
Bobby, I think we're going to kick it back over to you. Thank you all. Happy to take questions later, and I can't wait to learn from Douglas, Cheryl, Howard, and all of you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Okay, so we're going to bring back our institutions. I've had a chance to see that presentation a couple times, and there's so much there that every single time I feel like there's a couple new slides, a couple new points. And so as we get started, this is going to be a roundtable conversation with myself, Howard, Douglas, and Cheryl. And we're going to dive into that question of what does it look like to be an opportunity college or university, of which all 3 of them are. And then how does that intersect with what they do, particularly as leaders of community and civic engagement for their institutions? I'm sure they were interested in that point that was just shared, that there are only 54 of the community engaged institutions, which also have been designated as opportunity colleges and universities, which I believe is all 3 of these. So again, another kind of just round of appreciation for the work that you and the colleagues and everybody is doing at these institutions. So we're going to start by I want to ask each of you if you could just talk briefly about how your centers and programs kind of within your kind of realm of control and the places that you work every day, how do those intersect and advance this work as being an opportunity college or university? And we'll start this time maybe with Howard, and then Cheryl, and then end with Douglas for this one.
Thank you so much, Bobby. Again, DePaul University is in Chicago, where we have 2 campuses. just over 21,000 students, making us, in terms of enrollment, the largest Catholic university in the country. With a really strong emphasis, our mission is really centered on educational access and community engagement. So if you read through our mission, those are the key centerpieces that we are charged with working on as an institution. So having this classification is really nice to see, and an honor, of course. And the data speaks for itself, I guess. And so we have a kind of in this sort of area, we have really two areas of emphasis. One is really thinking about personalized support for students. And every unit is really charged with really thinking about how are we personalizing our support with students. And that directly relates to our Vincentian mission, which speaks to what we call Vincentian personalism. And then secondly is really emphasizing like a warning system for students who maybe need support. And then I would say not sort of as highlighted is our support for students in sort of career development and being able to transition from the higher ed context into these kinds of higher income opportunities for post-graduation. The reason I say it's not as highlighted is because I think it's done, we do have a really amazing career center that does that work, but I think it also is done in so many different ways that it happens across all different units, including our own. So we work with close to 4,000 students a year at the Stain Center. The vast majority of those is through academic service learning. So how we integrate community engagement into curriculum. So, over 3,500 students a year are going, both undergraduate and graduate, are in some way, one of 4 or 5 different modalities, integrating community engagement with collaborative partners from mostly in the Chicago region, many of which come from communities that our students come from. We have a long history of enrolling students who have had struggles with educational access for a variety of reasons, not only first-generation students, but historically marginalized students, most of whom are from Chicago. And that means that we're also working in communities that many of our students come from. Part of that, and I'll start with academic service learning, is really thinking about how we design opportunities for students collaboratively with community, but that are also amenable to their daily lives, to being able to integrate into perhaps a full-time class schedule, but also working full-time in some cases, or at least part-time in some cases, oftentimes commuter students. We have a large commuter student population. So that is one of the ways that we really think about on a daily basis, we're on a quarter system on a quarterly basis, how we design community engagement activities that allow students who don't necessarily have the opportunity to have community engagement skills developed through curriculum, being able to do so in a way that works with their daily lives, that works with their it really is getting down to what are some of the challenges students are going to have to actually be successful. And then lastly, I will say, translating those into literally resumes. How do you speak about it in a job interview? How do you translate it into your LinkedIn page, etc.? Those are the sort of nitty-gritty things that we all do with students to really make sure that they can convert what they're doing in communities to opportunities to move forward, and oftentimes opportunities that are truly meaningful and societal changing post-graduation. I'll leave it at that for now.
Once again, Cheryl Scafty with the University of Minnesota Duluth. And as I reflected on this question, I really think that as a regional public comprehensive land grant institution, economic and social mobility is central to our mission. It's really our bread and butter. And this designation really reinforces UMD's value proposition of access, research, and student outcomes and student success. Now, my program, UMD Engage, is located under Academic Affairs. It's a new program on campus, started just in 2023. And right now I'm in office of one. And it's been imperative to partner across all units and departments at the university. My work has really been focused on breaking down the silos, something which I think is increasingly important, and especially important in the current environment where it's evident that we cannot do this work alone. So I really feel like my office's job is to demonstrate how UMD's mission of public engagement, which it's clearly in our vision, our mission, and our values, this work, how it's woven into all aspects of our institution, from enrollment management to our orientation and welcome week, to being in the classroom with service learning and those experiential learning opportunities. The work of my program really is to support, promote, and amplify opportunities to engage with the broader community in both curricular and co-curricular offerings with an intentional focus on equitable access. And I really appreciated Howard talking some about career services and the role that I think within the opportunity college designation of how we help students translate these experiences and these learnings into the job market and into their careers. I have to say, in reflecting on this question, I started to think about the Minnesota delicacy, the hot dish. And you might be familiar with this Minnesota, really this Midwest staple. It's a collection of ingredients that are put together to make something quite delicious. And when it's done right, it's topped with tater tots. And I just think, as I think about the units and the programs and the centers work together to advance our work as an opportunity college, I see the work as kind of the great Minnesotan hot dish. And perhaps engagement is the topping, something that brings it all together and I think really makes a difference. In all seriousness, though, the central question I've been investigating as I continue to build out the portfolio of programs that I offer and that we offer as a university is how do we institutionalize engagement so it's not just something we do. Instead, it's a value of our institution. It's who we are. It's critical to our foundation and our culture. And this message, one that says connection and community is imperative and impactful, is really being echoed at all levels of UMD. As we welcome back our faculty this week, our Chancellor, Charles Neese, shared a message that demonstrated how our offerings, especially those related to the broader community and engagement, is having results on student success. And he referenced in that speech both our Carnegie designations as an opportunity university and as a university that's achieved the Carnegie Community Engagement Elective designation. And so I'm excited to continue to explore how our mission to engage our students in meaningful, impactful, co-created, and reciprocal relationships with our community is driving this student success and these student outcomes. So I'll leave it at that right now.
Yeah, thank you, Howard and Cheryl. Douglas Craddock, serve as the Vice President of Community Engagement at U of L. Whenever you're part of events or anything, either you want to go first or last. In this particular case, you want to go first because Howard and Cheryl have done an amazing job describing their institutions and amazing work that's occurring. I'll say here at U of L, we're an urban metropolitan institution, the heart of the city. We really say we're an anchor institution in that way. And from our office, the Office of Community Engagement, we have the responsibility, the accountability, but also the privilege of serving as that convener, that connector, that coordinator of really a lot of community engagement work. And within that, it situates around campus into the amazing work happening across the board. I would say when you really look at the student success side of the house and the work that has occurred to really earn this this designation, was provided really from the provost's office and that work that streamed down. Really a double down on student success and retention. Our first year to second year retention numbers have continued to grow. Last year, it's around 82%. We're hovering around 84% coming into this year. And it really speaks to the work and the efforts that have occurred across campus and admissions and enrollment management and all things in between around student affairs. And that's really positioned us for success. Our office has the opportunity while the students are here within student affairs and other offices to make sure that they're engaged. One thing that we do tout is that we're an engaged institution. We really situate ourselves to make sure that people understand that not only do we want students to be in the community, but be of the community. Feel like the work that they're doing is important, sustainable, and has impact far beyond their time here if they choose to leave the city. And I think that's one way that we really operate in the facet that we're 33% Pell Grant. We're a minority institution as well. So within that, we have a strong population that needs that sense of belonging community to exist around campus. And our office has the chance to really navigate that and situate that in a lot of different ways. In addition to that, we really work with our college access programs. So as the students are coming from high school, we're familiar with them. Once they step on campus, we make sure they have the resources they need to succeed. And then from there, we make sure we're with them just not first year to second year, but until they walk across that stage. And then within that, making sure that they're prepared. We know, and for many of us, COVID was really an opportunity to really look at the work that we were doing and how do we enhance it and elevate it. We know that many students are now coming to college unprepared for a lot of different reasons. Last year was our first true class from 2020 to 2024 to really see that COVID class and the loss of learning that took place and the gaps that existed at the institution. So we've done things around hiring an ESL advisor to make sure that we're there. Understanding the different learning gaps that exist for people that may operate on the spectrum, whether it's autism or anything, to make sure they have the support pieces they need across the board. So I'll say from our office standpoint, we have the positionality to be within the community, to showcase the efforts and the works that are occurring within our students, but also to make sure that they're centrally integrated within the office to do some amazing work. We talked about many times that, always expect the unexpected because the unexpected is expecting you. So in that aspect, we want to make sure that we operate in the capacity where we're preparing our students to face anything that may come once they leave the institution. Similar to Cheryl, we don't have a hot dish, but we have a hot brown. So we want to make sure in Louisville that we're doing that in a way that things turn out the way that it should when every office on campus is not working in silos, but working it together to make sure the students have what they need to be successful while they're here, but also when they leave the institution as well.
Okay, so I feel like there's a bit of a challenge, Howard, when we get this next question of how you are going to reference something about this work and like a Chicago Italian beef sandwich, just to kind of stay on track. I want to bring back Sarah and Mushtaq here in a minute, but I think I'd like to go back around just one more time. If quickly you guys could share, I hear a lot about the kind of integration that this work doesn't happen in a silo, right? Like it happens around integrating the work around career development across the campus and your centers, but also about the scaffolding. Douglas already talked about kind of those access programs. I know you guys run some really great upward bound and trio programs, particularly out of your office. If you guys could each kind of call out, are there other specific kind of levers or assets that you tap into across campus in order and community to help advance this work? And this time we're going to go, we'll go Douglas, Howard, and then we'll end with you, Cheryl.
Yeah, sure thing. Thank you, Bobby. So levers across campus. So when we think about this access side, we tap into our schools, such as the school engineering, which already has an in-depth kind of co-op program within the school that's a part of the academic curriculum. But then how we're preparing students coming into that curriculum, make sure they're prepared through STEM components and things of that nature. We have a really strong partnerships that exist externally that bleed in internally, let's say our Goodwill Opportunity Center. So making sure from a workforce development piece that we have situated partners that understand the work that we're attempting to do here at the university mixed within the community and make sure it's a multifaceted approach in things that we do across the board. I think leaning in a lot of times within the programming on campus is a direct reflection of how we lean into the community that we serve and make sure those things are marrying and make sure that iron is sharpening iron and make sure that we're doing things in a way that's extremely successful. As Bobby just mentioned, a trio. So Upward Bound Talent Search, everyone that's not familiar with them, that's a college access program that's been around for over 50 years. And it's really preparing students that usually don't have the chance to be exposed to college, providing them that exposure. And the program operates from a federal level standpoint, but we have the chance here to house those offices, but make sure that students get to college. And it may not always be U of L, but it's making sure that they have the opportunity to move forward in a positive way. And for those that come here, then they can translate into our TRIO Student Support Services program. But we also have recognized programs such as REACH here at the university that do an amazing job of making sure that our students are prepared. They have access to our Student Success Center and team and make sure they're prepared. But then around campus, we have something here called the Family Scholar House. So these are individuals that we partner with, and it's RAND, that's the name of the organization, but they're single moms who are seeking to get their education. But the way we function with them is we have an early learning center, and this is a child care development center that operates from 6 to 8 months all the way up to 5 years old. And this provides opportunities for mothers to attend classes, go to school, but also to make sure that child care is there in a way to support them in what they do while they earn their degree and operate on a higher level as it relates to their desire from an academic and a job perspective component. And that's literally right here on our campus and situated around the College of Education and Human Development and the work that we do. So there's examples that are situated all across campus that allow us to be one of those 54, one of those 21, to really make sure this work that we're doing is meaningful, impactful, but again, sustainable for years to come. Thank you, Bobby.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Douglas. So at DePaul, we're really thinking about partnerships, not only, as you said, across campus, but off campus as ways to support our students or support students who are incoming to the university even. I want to emphasize again that we have a really strong focus on caring for students. And I think the way that appears within our center, within the Stain Center, is not only, as I mentioned, in the way we're thinking about designing academic service learning, which is, very periodic, it's based on a course that you enroll in, but having also programs that emphasize intentionally attracting students who are underrepresented, who in a variety of ways. So we are really an umbrella center that houses a number of different things besides academic service learning. And I'll just mention a few of them. Through our Egan office, we have really thoughtfully structured ways for about 50 students every year, mostly from underrepresented backgrounds. And what I mean are first generation, historically marginalized for racial, ethnic, gender, et cetera. Also, I appreciated Douglas's focus on diverse learners as really an important one as well. And these students engage with schools in our communities, principally schools who are also in very economically distressed communities of Chicago, where we partner with those schools and the students take leadership in designing projects. They're funded to do so through federal work study dollars, through scholarship dollars. They're funded to do so to essentially build these projects in ways that the schools can be more embedded within their own communities. And in the process, students really learn about community engagement and gain firsthand skills, as I mentioned earlier, that are translated into opportunities in the workforce. One of the most important things about the Urban Schools Initiative, and it goes alongside some other projects that the Egan office runs, including the Community Partners Internship Program, which is also an internship program funded through federal work study dollars, and some other initiatives, is they have a quarterly set of professional development workshops. And I almost want to put professional development in quotes, because it is not just sort of professional development when you think about sort of, developing skills or career skills or things like that. We're also bringing in people who focus on restorative practice, who focus on mental health, care for students, right? In ways in which we can really think about what are the challenges these 50 students that we have might be having to get through and really attain a degree. I think enhancing that work with the professional development is a key way in which we are able to see success among students who oftentimes were not successful in the past. So that's one way our center, through community engagement, is specifically trying to increase student success. The last thing I'll mention is really thinking through the integration of, in other forms of community engagement. We offer opportunities for students to design their own internships, to design their own research projects. These are endowed programs where we are reaching out to college, schools, departments across the university and saying, send us your students with ideas that they've developed in collaboration with communities, could be their own community, and apply for funding for up to a year to do so. And we will fund those students in ways that obviously are directly related to their interest to community work, but also help build their skills for post-graduation experiences. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thanks, Howard. Cheryl?
So I've really appreciated the comments Howard and Douglas made, and it particularly makes me appreciate the complexities of supporting students. And it's all connected, from the diverse learning to some of the challenges folks are coming in the post-COVID environment, to mental health concerns. And so I think it's an interesting map of that we're kind of painting and building here. I also want to just say how much I appreciate this idea of building capacity and of equity to allow students to participate in these opportunities. And that's something that I think at UMD we're also looking at. When we have students who are working or have family commitments, how do we create opportunities for them to get these rich experiences, not at the risk of not being able to afford their tuition bill, or be able to do the other commitments that they have in their life. I will say that one thing that I think UMD is unique in Minnesota for is being one of 2 universities and the only public university to be designated as a Carnegie Opportunity University in the Higher Access, Higher Earnings category that also has a Carnegie Research designation. And that's something that that I think is interesting, and the opportunities that our school is trying to provide and connect students to those research opportunities as it relates to future outcomes. In our Swinson College of Science, all students are expected to participate in research, and looking at how we can connect that to community engagement is something I'm particularly interested in. I'll also just offer that I think one unique asset or lever we've tapped into in the community is just the close-knit nature of our campus and our community. Duluth, which is located on the western tip of Lake Superior, has around 87,000 residents. We have a student population undergrad of just over 9,000. And so I feel like we get kind of the best of both worlds, where students get to experience that personalized learning opportunity and also be able to engage in real world discovery within that close-knit campus and community that we have here in Duluth. And I also, maybe the last thing that I'll bring up is just that UMD really has a goal of being a place where belonging fuels momentum, where learning leads to lasting rewards. And how we are doing that sense of belonging is through things like community engaged learning opportunities, service experiences, internships, and research projects. And they're really laying the foundation for future success of our students. So yeah, I think that's where I'll leave it at that. But I've really enjoyed learning from Howard and Douglas too of some of the great work your campuses are doing, and I'm taking notes. So
thank you. Okay, I want to. This was great. I want to bring back Mushtaq and Sarah, and I want to get into it right away. I'm curious, Mushtaq and Sarah, you guys, spend all the time in the data and in the weeds thinking about this classification. And I know in previous conversations you talked about how do we change practice by institutions understanding where they are and how you move forward. What struck you across these three institutions that you were just hearing about?
A couple things. One, the diversity of approach, I think. I mean, all three institutions, I think, are obviously trying to serve their students best. And I think the different interventions are interesting and probably inspired locally. And I think that's so important. It's not surprising, given that we're talking to folks that are deeply enmeshed in sort of community engagement, that you're really thinking about your communities. So, kudos to you. I think that's the thing that maybe struck me most. Sarah, what about you?
Related to that, I think the thing I would probably love if we had another hour would be to just hear a little bit more about how you differentiate. And all of you talked about how you think about different types of student groups. And I'm curious if there are ways that are lessons learned, either for us or just, so that for our folks on this call, of like, are there ways that certain student groups or certain types of student populations you've really found have been more successful than not, or not successful? And so I think that's the question we get a lot is, how do I serve student parents, or how do I serve veteran students, or how do I serve, some certain type of first generation student? And we don't know the answer. And I think we're looking to folks like you who are opportunity colleges who do. And I would be curious sort of your learnings and reflections on that, because it's very clear that you all are very thoughtful on how you are connecting dots and thinking about the types of students you serve. Those, of course, look a little different, but I'm curious, I'd be curious to know more, again, in a different world where we had all day to talk, what you've sort of learned about those specific populations.
Yeah, Bobby, I don't know if we have time for this, but sort of in that vein, I mean, one of the things that is very important to the Carnegie Foundation, to ACE, is really trying to catalog the things that are working. And, for the purpose of scale, I imagine that you guys might start getting, the three institutions on this call might start getting some calls from those on the visualization that are a little bit lower on access or a little bit lower on earnings, to ask, what are you guys doing? What did you do to get you in a position where you have this designation? And I think actually one of the places I sometimes tell my students in the classroom as they think about like what career path they're going to do, I sometimes say, maybe the first place to start is to start eliminating things that you don't want to do, And I'm curious if we had a little bit more time, are there things that each of your campuses tried that you realize didn't move the needle, that either sound fun or sound sexy, or you think that like other people might be either doing better or somehow maybe it's just not working at scale? I just would be curious, again, if we had a little bit more time. And then Bobby, I see that great question in the Q&A too, that I want to make sure you have a chance to be able to answer, but just a couple of reflections from us. And you're on mute, my friend.
Sorry about that. Anybody want to respond to either of those? Particularly, I think Mushtaq's last question, if there are things that you guys tried or that you're aware your institutions have tried that you kind of looked around and said, these are not getting us where we need to be? Everything has worked perfect at these three institutions. There's been not, that's what I'm hearing. Howard?
Okay, well, this may be counterintuitive in some ways, but a couple of things I would say. One of the things that various times we've looked at is being much more, we are place-based in Chicago. But we serve really the entire metropolitan area, and we have partners outside, including international, in terms of community partnerships. What hasn't worked for us, and it may be where we are, but also just the landscape of Chicago, is a very sort of kind of a connection to one specific neighborhood, or institutionalizing ourselves with a storefront in a neighborhood to do community engagement. That piece, we've tried, we've researched it, and it is not effective for us to be very neighborhood specific in the city. The other thing I would say is programs that are dictated from other places outside of Chicago. I won't name any, but when we have taken in grants in the past where there have been sort of, this is how it works and this is how you have to do it, but don't sort of localize the sort of understanding of what it means in a place-based sense, it hasn't been very effective. And we've struggled through it, and we've tried to make it work. And sometimes we've had to sunset some certain programs in that regard. So yeah, those are the two things that I would emphasize that haven't been as effective for DePaul.
Okay, I'm going to, because we do have a couple questions and time always runs quick, and I have a couple lined up too if we can get to. I do want to do a shout out. Howard has not name dropped it, but the asset-based community development work that is national in scope, but really is anchored at DePaul, is also like an incredible example of just a way to approach this work from a strategic perspective. So Julie Dierberger asked this question, and we're going to kind of go with like spicy but brief answers. So from anybody here, Julie asked, are there unique ways that you are incentivizing or supporting faculty members to take on these engaged teaching strategies, including things like retention, promotion, tenure?
Yeah, I can respond to that one. So, Julie, thank you for the question. One thing that we've done here is created a faculty fellows program. Also within that, we have incentivized it to the standpoint that we do a course buyout for faculty members. It's interdisciplinary work, and it's for 2 semesters. And they operate as a cohort, really focused on community-based participatory research or action-based research or something from the community engagement standpoint. And really focusing on that, we pay for conference, we get it incentivized on that end, but then also we get dean buy-in. So we get recommendations from the dean to help determine what the faculty member is, and it's open scale. So it's just not tenure faculty, pre-tenure, whatever the case may be. It's open to faculty that wants to do this work at a high level, and many times don't have the opportunity to, whether it's because of their teaching schedule, their research schedule, whatever the case may be. So one way we've had the chance to do that is our faculty fellow program. In addition to that, we have something we call our community engagement liaisons. So these are representatives from each academic unit that kind of has a dotted line up to my office. So within that standpoint, we meet monthly to determine what the community engagement plan is for that particular academic unit. The dean supports it, and we operate in that realm as well to make sure that not only is it incentivized from a financial standpoint, but also from a recognition standpoint in the work that's being done. And then lastly, we have an academic symposium that we operate within. Bobby has been a part of this past year and seen it, but it's an opportunity for faculty, staff, and students, particular faculty, to present their research in a compelling way on campus or off campus to illustrate the amazing work that's happening across the board. And I'll stop there.
Thanks, Douglas. Anybody else want to quickly respond to that one? Okay. Cheryl, I'm going to put you on the seat for this one because I think you talked about this at the end, but Amy was wondering if there's any examples of how your universities are ensuring that undergraduate research projects and internships connect directly to earnings.
I think that's a really interesting question, and I don't have the math or the formula or the data in front of me to directly demonstrate how undergraduate research projects are connecting to earnings. But I am struck by how our emphasis on our campus on research and on providing undergraduate research opportunities to students is maybe moving the needle and providing opportunities to engage in the work, in the learning in a more integrated experiential way. And presenting that data, presenting their research through student presentations. So I might need to go back and dig a little bit more. So I'm writing Amy's name down to see if I can find some more specific data. But I'd be interested to hear if other folks have thoughts on that as well, on how we can demonstrate those research and really this community engagement work in general. Is it moving the needle on these outcomes?
Cheryl, would you let me and Sarah know too, because it's definitely a topic that we've been really interested in. I mean, we have a theory, I think, that undergraduate research leads to excellent student outcomes at the end. I mean, I think from a retention point of view, that seems incredibly intuitive. From getting your first job, it also seems incredibly intuitive. And I'd love to see the data that sort of backs it up. I haven't seen it yet, but if anybody has it, we'd love to see it. And Sarah and I are thinking about pulling together a group of institutions that are in this research college and university category to be able to tackle exactly this question about like, what's the link between undergraduate research and outcomes? We think it's there. We'd just love to learn a little bit more.
I love that you guys are into it. Go ahead, Douglas.
So quick snapshot, it's kind of anecdotal, but we have something we created called our Center for Engaged Learning. And our undergrad research portfolios are presented during the summer for these group of students, but particularly we have a board of advisors that operate. And within that, these board of advisors are donators to the university. But from that, they sponsor what we call mini grants for these undergrad research projects. Many of these individuals are within the business community. So a lot of it is coming from the business community that's sponsoring undergrad research. And then they get to see the presentations, come within the year, where the case may be. And then we're building relationship capital, which is extremely important. So from that end, we're building a tie-in between the undergrad students, business and community leaders with the work that they're doing. And then from that, there's relationships forming that we believe will impact them in a meaningful way as they matriculate through their university side. So our Center for Engaged Learning does an excellent job of doing that, tied to kind of this board of advisors group within the president's office. And from that, we're building something out. We don't have the data yet, but as we build it out and begin to build our case, we make sure that we have the chance to report that. So that's one instance that I know that it's occurring on a small scale with the opportunity to build up on.
Okay, well, we have about like 90 seconds. And so as we wrap, my colleagues here could see in a Google Doc alongside, I had a flurry of questions, and I'll tell you, they all actually center on the same thing. So I'm just going to end with making the point, and if there's a quick bit someone wants to say, which is, I'm concerned about the moment we're in and all of this work, which is on a multiple fold. I mean, everything from the DOJ guidance on July 29th, which named things like geography-based admissions as something that, is up against civil rights and current law, which of course there's lots of guidance and language that's helping us understand how that's absolutely not the case and how our institutions are navigating it. But also I was just thinking about the data. I was wondering from Mushtaq and Sarah, like so much of this classification relies on data, and we've seen so many cuts to the Institute of Education Sciences, and how is that going to impact the ability for our institutions to all understand, and places like ACE to be able to help us understand how this work manifests. And then ultimately, so much of this work is connected to federal funding streams, whether it's TRIO or Upward Bound or Federal Work Study, and our ability to support students in holistic ways, Parent Plus loans, all of these things that make up the real fabric and some of these great metaphors that have been talked about the great dishes that allow us to kind of create the necessary recipe for success. So just to note that this work is so critical, but we're also at a moment we're defending the work and making the case about why this work is so critical, and the programs that allow it to flourish are really necessary. So I'm going to end on that point. Thank you so much to our panelists and hosts, and for all of those that are going to view this in a recording. I was saying we're going to be integrating this at Campus Compact into several of our initiatives because we really want to think about how we can support our members in driving forward and getting more in that top right quadrant of opportunity colleges and universities. So thank you for being with us today. Much more to come on this informing storytelling and narrative change work from Campus Compact. Have a wonderful day and a great start to the semester.